So in today's sports file, we're taking a short look at the Edmonton Oilers of the early 1980s. Now, as many of you already know, the Edmonton Oilers joined the NHL in 1979 after being part of the KWHA era since 1972. The biggest gain in the NHL was Wayne Gretzky, who was the leader of the Oilers in that first season. And we have to remember the early Oilers weren't the Oilers of the championship years. They were still developing as a team. The biggest problem with that original 1980 season, although they did make the playoffs and put up a valiant effort against the eventual Stanley Cup finalists, the Philadelphia Flyers, besides Gretzky, they didn't have much on offense. Blair McDonald and Stan Weir and Mark Massey wasn't the player he was in the next couple of seasons. But the big problem with that campaign was pretty well obvious. This was before Andy Moog and Grant Fuhr showed up, who were a big part of those championship years. It's hard to believe, but that original season, they had a mixture of WHA and NHL castoffs, and some of those goalies were over the hill even before the start of the season. No offense to Ken Dryden's brother Dave Dryden, but he had a terrible year that year. At age 38, he was well past his prime. Eddie Mio and Ron Lowe, who ended up being the two key goalies for Edmonton that year, were joined by Jim Corsi, Don Cutts, and Bob Dupuis. Some of them are not even household names in their own household. But the big problem with that season, again, is just the consistency on defense. They showed some strong offense here and there, especially on certain games against the Maple Leafs on Hockey Night in Canada. And that year, of course, Gretzky, in his opening season, did so well. He tied for the scoring championship with Marcel Dion. Very solid season of 137 points. But having BJ or Blair McDonald as his winger, we affectionately called him in the media the the bounce off or the pylon. He had 94 points on Gretzky's line, and even anybody could got 94 points on Gretzky's line back in the day. Now, if you look at the lineup of the 1980 Oilers compared to 81, there was a big change in outlook. Yeri Curry, Glenn Anderson, a lot of the big superstars joined the team. It was a great year in 1981, and the momentum on that year built during the regular season. 1981, Andy Moog arrived late in the year for the Oilers and had a great playoff campaign, helping Edmonton beat Montreal in the first round. Now that series put Edmonton on the map in more ways than one, because in the second round they had a chance to meet the New York Islanders, who eventually won the Stanley Cup that year. And that series was a tremendous campaign for the Oilers. And again, that season was kind of different, because the Oilers again finished under 500, despite Gretzky's 164 points, Curry's 32 goals. Kevin Lowe also was a main addition, and the solid play of Fogelin, Hunter, Semenko, even young Don Murdoch and Dave Lumley on the defensive side. But the second round against the Islanders, they were overmatched. But here's where the interesting thing comes in. 1982 season was the emergence of the first season of superstar Grant Fuhr as part of the Oiler tandem. The Oilers were almost an unstoppable force, and many times in a regular season. That year they ended up with 48 wins. Glenn Sather had brought them to the level where they knew they could be. Anderson alone had 105 points in a great year. Most times he didn't play on Gretzky's line. Risto Siltanen also had a good year. Montreal Canadiens cast-off Pat Hughes had 24 big goals that year, and Semenko again was working as Gretzky's protector. And the young defenseman Charlie Huddy had a very, very good year. And you'd be surprised, like, the amount of consistency that Edmonton was showing on a regular basis. It was nice to see. But the biggest problem for the Oilers that year wasn't in the regular season. It was the playoffs. Now, for some reason, after a great regular season, they played the Marcel Dion-led Kings, And in one of the games, which will go down in NHL history as one of the biggest collapses ever, Edmonton was ahead 5-0 in one of the games and eventually lost 6-5 in what is called probably one of the biggest collapses in NHL history. But Edmonton didn't panic after that playoff loss against the Kings. If anything, they reloaded for the next season. And the next year, although they lost to the Islanders in the finals, they showed enough strength in their playoff run to be a force to be reckoned with. But you have to understand, the Edmonton Oilers from 1979-80 to 81-82 were still developing. There was a lot of young players that were still trying to find their way. They were still working on their third and fourth line. But a lot of people point to the loss of the Kings as sort of their wake-up call. In my personal opinion, the 5-0 loss was hampered away by a massive mistake by veteran player Gary Unger, who was picked up by Edmonton the year before as sort of like a veteran presence. He took a massive penalty in that game, that 5-0 comeback, the 6-5 comeback win for the Kings, and that basically ruined him. You can't take a massive penalty like that, especially for a veteran in the playoff series, and hope to win a game. You have to be consistent all the way through. Now, what I liked about Edmonton at the time, even their secondary role players were getting enough quality minutes on the ice. Now, for the Edmonton fans that are out there now that only follow with Connor McDavid, take a close look if you have a chance to see YouTube, Hockey Night in Canada, or the ITV games. You know, Edmonton was really scoring a lot of goals at the time. That 1981-82 season, there were some games that were scoring, 9-10 goals. That year, of course, Gretzky had the 92 goals, 212 points, probably arguably the greatest pro season by any athlete ever. So, if you're an Edmonton Oilers fan and you want to find out more about the club, there's a lot of history, a lot of photos, a lot of YouTubes out there, and most of the games are called by the great Don Whitman. And let me tell you something, he was a really, really, really good announcer to explain the quality of those young players. But for me, Paul Coffey too as well. I forgot to mention Paul previously in the podcast. He was an outstanding player. If you could take the best of Bobby Orr and Tim Horton, all the great defensemen, it would be in him. So, again, we're going to have a future podcast on the early 80s NHL. Haven't decided if it's going to be on Toronto Maple Leafs or kind of the Flyers, kind of unofficial last dynasty, because the Islanders were pretty good in the late 70s, early 80s. I'd like to talk at least a combination of that, because the Leafs and the Flyers are always connected. So on this great early January day, all we like to say is, as usual, keep your stick in the ice. Have a good day. Bye.